The last meal that ended a tradition. It's no secret that even the worst people on this earth are still given one final courtesy before they die. A last meal. The tradition of offering people on death row a final meal has existed in the American prison system for a long time, and for many years, it was seen as one of the last remaining gestures of humanity in an otherwise cold process. But what most people don't realize is that the last meal you imagine, extravagant, personalized, and indulgent, barely exists anymore. And in at least one major place, it disappeared entirely. Let me explain. While the death row last meal is most commonly associated with the United States, the tradition itself is far older than America, and even older than Christianity. For thousands of years across countless cultures, it was customary to give condemned individuals a final meal before execution. In ancient times, the reasoning wasn't kindness, it was fear. Many societies believed that if someone was executed without being properly fed, their spirit would return as a hungry ghost to haunt the living, which is honestly kind of funny when you think about it. They weren't afraid of the fact that they had just killed someone.
Story I wanted to tell you.
They were afraid
It's
that the
about,
person would
well,
come back
something
angry
difficult to
because they were
explain,
hungry.
really.
Despite that bizarre logic, the tradition survived. Ancient Greeks believed a final meal was necessary for the soul to cross into the underworld. Ancient Romans fed not only criminals, but also gladiators heavily before combat, just in case they died during the games, ensuring they crossed over properly. And already, it starts to feel like the ticket to the afterlife was, apparently, a good meal. Eventually, this tradition made its way into the American prison system in the early 1800s and became more formally regulated in the early 1900s. Different states developed different rules. In Florida, inmates could request almost anything as long as the ingredients were locally sourced and cost less than $40. In Oklahoma, the limit was $25. In Louisiana, the prison warden would sometimes join the inmate for the final meal, which is probably one of the most uncomfortable dinners imaginable. But out of all the states, Texas became known for being unusually generous, often granting large, unrestricted requests with minimal budget limitations. That generosity ended because of one person. Lawrence Brewer was on death row for a brutal and racially motivated murder. Without getting graphic, his crime was horrific, and his punishment was execution. Like others before him, Brewer was offered a final meal. His request was massive: 2 fried chicken steaks, a triple patty bacon cheeseburger, a cheese omelet, fried okra, a pound of barbecue, 3 fajitas, a meat lover's pizza, ice cream, peanut butter fudge, and 3 root beers. Texas honored it. Then, when the food arrived, Brewer didn't take a single bite. He pushed the plates away and said, "I'm not hungry." The food was removed, and shortly after, he was executed. When the story broke, public outrage followed immediately, not just because of who he was, but because of what he did. Texas officials were furious, and almost overnight, the state ended custom last meals entirely. From that moment on, death row inmates in Texas would eat whatever the cafeteria served that day. No requests, no exceptions. One person ruined it for everyone. The touchdown celebration that broke the NFL. I love sports. Playing them, watching them, learning the stories behind them. Sports are one of the few things that consistently bring people together. And while I'm not the biggest fan of professional sports, there is one part of them that I've always loved: the extra stuff. The fights in hockey, the trash talk in basketball, the ridiculous flops in soccer, and of course, touchdown celebrations in American football. For a long time, touchdown celebrations were one of the most entertaining parts of the game. Players finally had a moment to show personality after doing something incredible. But there was one celebration so iconic, so disruptive, that it ended up getting banned entirely. And it all traces back to one man. If you follow American football at all, the name Jimmy Graham probably isn't unfamiliar. Born in 1986, Graham was drafted into the NFL in 2010 by the New Orleans Saints. Over the course of his career, he played for the Saints, the Seattle Seahawks, the Green Bay Packers, and the Chicago Bears. He was known not only for his athleticism, but for one very specific habit after scoring touchdowns. Whenever Jimmy Graham
I guess
scored,
this is
he would
the
take the
story I
football,
wanted to
run
tell you.
straight to the goalpost, and dunk it over the
something
crossbar
difficult to
like a
explain,
basketball.
Really.
It looked incredible. It was confident. It was memorable. And fans loved it. The problem was that goalposts aren't designed to be dunked on. Over time, Graham's celebrations began physically bending the goalposts. And this wasn't just cosmetic damage. A bent goalpost meant the game had to stop so officials could realign or replace it. These delays ranged anywhere from 2 minutes to over 20 minutes. In live, televised professional sports, that's a nightmare. It throws off schedules, frustrates advertisers, and disrupts the entire broadcast. So the NFL stepped in. Because of Jimmy Graham's repeated goalpost dunks and the chaos they caused, the league banned dunking the football on the goalpost entirely. What started as one player's signature celebration became illegal for everyone. One touchdown celebration was so cool, it literally broke the game. And that's why nobody gets to do it anymore. When Halloween almost disappeared, the fear caused by the Tylenol murders didn't stop at medicine cabinets. It spilled into everyday life in ways most people don't immediately think about, including Halloween. In October of 1982, just weeks after the poisonings dominated national news, paranoia was everywhere. Parents weren't just worried about painkillers anymore. They were worried about anything their children might consume. Candy, homemade treats, even sealed packages suddenly felt suspicious. That year, Halloween attendance across the United States dropped dramatically. Many parents refused to let their children go trick-or-treating at all. Grocery stores reported candy sales falling by more than 20% compared to previous years. Neighborhoods that were normally packed with kids were eerily quiet. Nothing had actually changed about Halloween itself. There were no confirmed cases of poisoned candy connected to the Tylenol murders. But fear doesn't need proof. It only needs possibility. One person's actions created a level of national distrust so intense that an entire holiday was nearly abandoned. And even decades later, the echoes remain every time parents warn their kids not to eat candy until it's checked first. The Tylenol murders and the end of trust. If you have an active Netflix subscription and even a mild interest in true crime, there's a good chance you've already seen the documentary about the Tylenol murders. And if you're like me, someone who was born long after the event, it's almost impossible to imagine a time when medicine bottles didn't have tamper-proof seals. But in 1982, that was normal. Between September and October of that year, at least 7 people died after taking cyanide-laced Tylenol extra-strength capsules in the Chicago area. The victims included men, women, and children. None of them knew each other. None of them did anything wrong. They simply took a trusted over-the-counter painkiller and died because of it. To this day, no one has ever been caught or convicted for the poisonings. What made the situation even worse was how quickly panic spread. Once the story made national headlines, fear took over. People stopped trusting medicine bottles entirely, and almost immediately, copycats appeared. Other individuals across the country began poisoning products, inspired by the chaos and attention. Trust in consumer safety collapsed almost overnight.
I guess
At the time, Tylenol controlled roughly 35% of the over-the-counter painkiller market.
Really.
After the murders, that number dropped to around 8%. People weren't just afraid of Tylenol. They were afraid of everything on store shelves. If you lived through that period, it felt like anything could be contaminated. Nothing felt safe. In response, Johnson & Johnson issued a massive recall, pulling over $100 million worth of product from shelves nationwide. They cooperated closely with the Chicago Police Department, the FBI, and the FDA, forming relationships that fundamentally changed how pharmaceutical crises were handled. But the most lasting change came from packaging. Tamper-resistant seals became the new standard. Induction seals, safety rings, blister packs, the annoying layers you have to fight through today exist largely because of this event. Product tampering was officially criminalized at the federal level. Regulations around capsules and tablets tightened significantly. The result? Medicine became safer, but trust was permanently altered. Because of one person, consumers lost the ability to trust unsealed products. And while nothing fun was banned in this case, something far more important was lost: the assumption that everyday items on a shelf hadn't been touched. And that changed everything. The sushi prank that killed conveyor belts. I've never been to Japan, but it's been near the top of my bucket list for as long as I can remember. The culture is fascinating, the landscapes are beautiful, and the technology always feels just slightly ahead of the rest of the world. And one of the most uniquely Japanese experiences, at least from an outsider's perspective, is conveyor belt sushi. There's something almost magical about sitting at a table while plates of sushi glide past you on a moving belt. You grab what you want, eat at your own pace, and enjoy the simplicity of the system. It's efficient, convenient, and built almost entirely on trust. Trust that people won't touch food that isn't theirs. That trust was shattered in early 2023. At a sushiro restaurant in Japan's Aichi Prefecture, a 17-year-old boy walked in, sat down, and decided to film himself doing something that can only be described as disgusting. He licked soy sauce bottles, teacups, and even pieces of sushi, then placed them back onto plates and sent them down the conveyor belt for other customers. The video was uploaded online and went viral almost immediately, racking up tens of millions of views. What some might dismiss as a prank was treated very differently in Japan. The video caused national outrage. The incident was quickly labeled sushi terrorism because it exposed a serious health risk in a system that relies entirely on social responsibility. Overnight, people began questioning whether conveyor belt sushi was even safe. The consequences were severe. The teenager was arrested, and Sushiro sued him for roughly $480,000 in damages. But the real damage went far beyond one lawsuit. The company reportedly lost billions of yen in market value as customers stayed away and investors lost confidence. The reputation hit was immediate and brutal. In response, Sushiro made a drastic decision. Traditional conveyor belts carrying real food were removed and replaced with digital ordering systems and animated displays. Sushi no longer casually passed by your table. You now had to order everything directly. One person broke the trust, and an entire dining experience disappeared because of it. The mustache that the world abandoned. Let's shift from crimes and tragedies to something much lighter. Facial hair. Specifically, one very small mustache that somehow became one of the most socially banned things on the planet. Look at a narrow strip of hair centered just above the upper lip. What's the first thing that comes to mind? For most people, the answer isn't a beloved silent film star or early comedian. It's Adolf Hitler. And that association is so strong that many people don't even know the original name of the style. It's called the toothbrush mustache. Before World War II, the toothbrush mustache was completely normal. It was worn by everyday people and popular entertainers, including Charlie Chaplin and Oliver Hardy. It wasn't political. It wasn't controversial. It was just a grooming choice. Then Hitler adopted it, and that was the end of it. After the rise and fall of Nazi Germany, the toothbrush mustache became permanently linked to one of the most evil figures in history. It didn't matter who wore it or why. The style was socially radioactive. Try wearing one today and no one will compliment your Chaplin look. They'll think of Hitler immediately. The mustache was never legally banned, but socially it may as well have been.
I guess
Even
this
attempts
is
to
the
revive
story
it
I wanted
failed.
to tell you.
One of the most
about,
surprising
well,
examples
something
came from
difficult to
Michael
explain,
Jordan,
really.
who briefly wore a version of the style in the late 1980s. Despite being one of the most famous and respected athletes in the world, even he faced backlash. The stigma was too strong. The mustache didn't do anything wrong, but one man ruined it for everyone, and the world collectively agreed to leave it in the past. Satisfaction not guaranteed anymore. As consumers, we're constantly being promised one thing above all else: satisfaction. Money back guaranteed. No questions asked. These policies exist to build trust and reassure people that they aren't being taken advantage of. And for the most part, they work. But sometimes, generosity gets abused. For decades, LL Bean was famous for having one of the most generous return policies in the world. The company offered a lifetime guarantee on most of its products. If you bought something and were ever dissatisfied, even years later, you could return it for a full refund or replacement. It didn't matter how old the item was or how worn it had become. Customers loved it. The policy became part of the brand's identity. Unfortunately, a small group of people began exploiting that generosity. Some customers returned decades-old clothing. Others brought in items they hadn't even purchased themselves. Over time, the abuse became too frequent to ignore. In 2018, LL Bean officially ended its lifetime satisfaction guarantee. The company limited returns to 1 year and required proof of purchase. While still more generous than many brands, it marked the end of an era. One group of people pushed the system too far, and everyone else lost a benefit they had trusted for generations. All it takes is one. When you step back and look at all of these stories together, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. None of these things disappeared because they were inherently bad ideas. Last meals, touchdown celebrations, conveyor belt sushi, trust in medicine, generous return policies, all of them existed because people believed others would act responsibly, and most people did. But it only took one person, or in some cases a very small group, to break that trust. One inmate wasting a final meal, one athlete bending a goalpost, one teenager licking food, one unknown person poisoning medicine, one group abusing generosity, and once that line was crossed, the response was almost always the same. Remove the privilege entirely. That's the uncomfortable reality. Systems aren't usually destroyed by everyone misbehaving. They're destroyed because someone proved they could be. So if there's a takeaway here, it's not paranoia or cynicism. It's awareness. Because history shows us that when something relies on trust, all it takes is one person to ruin it for everyone.